Soggy crickets is all I can say. Finally. Still a little bit warm where we are. But that's not going to cut it, folks. I don't know what else to say. I wish I could just say that and stop. I'm running out of things to say, except examples for why we should say it, why I should say it, and that's partly why I only come back and keep coming back, attempting to explain how dire this condition really is. We've really been done good. They're really coming in pretty stealthy, as they tell us. They are transparent to us. We want to move transparently. Everybody thinks, oh, we get to see through to see what's going on in government. No, that's not what they mean. And I think over time, those of you that have stuck with me have found out, on your own even, that that's in fact the case. The transparency is the fact of you not seeing how stealthy they've been coming upon the ubiquitous they, which is now not so ubiquitous in that we can at least identify who they are by their own documents in the news, in the public, in the documentation, in the legal, in the world. The moral authority of which now has grabbed the ring to impose upon you a religious order of the world. And as I say, you cannot believe in God. It doesn't mean that God may not exist. It does not exist. You can believe, you can stick your fingers in your ears and say la la la. It doesn't mean there's not someone there attempting to do something. And it doesn't mean that if you put your head in the sand, behind the woodshed bucket of sand, as it were, it doesn't mean someone's not going to come up and kick you in the tail, if not worse. And so again, I come every week to try and show as many ways as I can, and was able to, because it did come down on us here, they did do it to plan, have been able to very well focus on documentation. And if you weren't going to go out and read it yourself, you at least heard, this is what's on us. And as I've been trying to build substantiation, and I think it's a fairly concise and fairly unequivocal condition, that you can't remain silent and you're required to act against this if you don't want it on you. And boy, there's going to be a lot on you. And so we see the rollout. I told you the bums rush is on. It's just fascinating to watch that come about. It's really interesting to be able to confirm to at least any one of you, and myself certainly, that your research and your study is turning up exactly what you have been researching and studying. It was not off point. The acts of the enemy are coming to fruition. I'm talking beyond an opinion, a thought that I can point to, oh, the courts are corrupt or this or that. I'm talking about they use these advantages as to advance the war against you, to take your territory, to take your livelihood, to take your way of life, to take any notion of what you thought was. And they use your weaknesses against you. And I've been tempting to expose some of those in us. We pretty much know them anyway, but we tend to want to not look at them. And I'll acknowledge, I heard Solomon on Freaker's Ball. He made an interesting observation, probably as good as anything I could probably ever come up with, that those that don't want to listen to this and don't actually defend themselves against this, probably have an internal conflict of interest with the truth of the condition. And I thank you, Solomon. It's probably as good as I could even think of. It's an interesting thought. But my problem with that after hearing that was how sad. How sad this is, because I realize that there's a lot of people with a conflict of interest against the actual reality. And some of it's not really of our own making. It's really, we've been done good, but that's not an excuse either. So thank you for that. A conflict of interest, a pretty interesting thought, which explains a lot to me, actually. Even if it's more than that, but even if it's not. The conflict of interest in people against the truth of the reality that we're facing really forces people away. That's an interesting observation. That explains why there might not be as many of us. It may be why we have the 3 to 5% that are really the actual action that causes the change. If we used to hear as the revolution, but actually now we have to not do the change, the hope and change. We have to hold to the foundations of our lives, because they're going to be wrested from us. And we have a bunch of people that will blame you, even though you're innocent, for something they've made up. And one of the main things I've been suggesting, and you see this periodically, and I hadn't had it, we've fought behind the woodshed, and again, as I say that, thank you for anybody and everybody that stepped up and gave me equipment, donated the equipment to make this stream even stronger. Even when we were having a lot of trouble fighting through it, you realize digital technology and the way to get us through that is very important connection. That you find that the digital technology it's becoming the focus. It's a hub. It's a strength and a weakness that I want to just touch again. To remind you, you have to have an alternative lifestyle, and I don't mean in the way they're telling us about alternative lifestyle. I mean, you have to go and have a foundational, they want to say it's off the grid lifestyle set up and ready to go. Actually, it should, right about now, you should be almost, you should be sitting in the seat getting ready to start the motor for it. At this point, you should be checking all the oils. You should make sure you have plenty of fuel in this machine that you're going to start up, because I think it's about ready to have to be put in place, and you should have that in place and working right before all of this stuff comes down. And I don't mean just your money and your food. I'm talking about the way to address this enemy on us. Like I told you last week, the cities have already been in place to do what this condition is going to be upon us. Those of you that listen to me are probably the extremists they're talking about. And in fact, I'll just let you know without naming anybody. I just listened and saw, as somebody who was in a seat of decision in a city has turned. They don't see a problem with how this is coming down. And but when they started in the office, they were a staunch supporter of individual rights, property, and things like that. And so this is how this works. Over time, they're turned, they're influenced. And that's why I say we need to have that counter-influence. And if you don't, the seats of decision turn this thing against us. And it's almost, keep looking, and I don't look too long, because it kind of wears on you. It wears on that little the insecurity that we have. It's not an insecurity, it's a pragmatism that says this thing gets too big, and then you use that to talk yourself out of doing something. But this thing is really big. And yet it's defeatable. So another thing, the electronic connection that we have, we showed last week that it can be shut off. Now this week, another story. Congo government allegedly shuts off internet service to squash protests. Now this is Congo. Remember, this is where the UN went in to look like the peacekeeper, and the United States and the allies beat it down. It was a republic at one time that looked like that it exampled the United States of America in its better day. And that wasn't good enough for these people. The United States itself went in and beat it down, using the UN to do it. And I've talked about this before. But here's this government coming in to squash protests by cutting off your line of communication, and interestingly, probably the only actual line ever developed, because people have stopped talking to themselves outside of the electronic connection, which is going to be their downfall. So I call this out. Remind yourself that you can't tie into that system without an alternative, because they can flick the switch at any time. They can interfere. In fact, today I'm dealing with some more problems. I don't even know where they come from. I can't get emails in right now. I got some this morning, but I haven't been able to get anything else since. I've had people tell me they've sent them, and I can't get them. So there's somebody inside the backside of this thing making adjustments so that these emails don't want to show up. So there's controls, and we know that. You have to have alternatives. In fact, I'm having to think, okay, what do I have as an alternative? We've got a lot of work to do coming up. What do I do instead of the internet? What do I do for getting information from people? So you better start putting your mindset into how we address this. And not just as we were talking about that lawsuit that went in that showed that the people in Europe deserve a higher level of private protection for their so-called personal data. And I have to say, I happened to hear my last broadcast. I don't remember when it was. I happened to click over, found it playing somewhere. It must have been on RLM, or RealLibertyMedia.com. I was doing something. That's right, it was. I was updating a link. And thank you to the emailer that sent me that link. I don't really remember what it was, but anyway, I updated the link to a specific article. I think it was Brzezinski, now that I'm thinking of rolling into that. But so I was able to update. Well, I was hearing my broadcast when I was doing that. And I have to tell you, folks, if you didn't listen to last week's and really sit down and think about it, I was really giving you some pretty decent definitions and conditions and structurings of what's going on and why. That, again, when I do this behind the woodshed, it's ad hoc. It just comes out of me the way it is. I don't really have a script. I do have my tabs, but that's along a thematic presentation of content to get me from one concept and subject matter to the next. That last week I thought I did fairly well in explaining these conditions that are on us. That here we have this week, after we have the attorney, the lawyer I called him because he did the law to assert the case against the Safe Harbor Act the United States was imposing as an agreement on the European data, that the European court, the highest court, said that was a trespass upon the protections of personal data. That this week the news is that GCHQ, which is the NSA for Britain, has handed a new smartphone hacking legal powers. So it's about the personal data. The safe harbor was too much, but not so for the internal infrastructure of the government to come in and put upon you its power. Spy agencies in Britain will be given the explicit right to hack into smartphones and computers as part of a new law being introduced by the conservative government. The conservative government. They're conserving the government, folks. This is not conservative. You folks all need to really pay attention to what these words mean. Conservative party, you got to understand what that means. They're no different, as we've been hearing over and over. I've been saying this for years now. Other people are saying it as well, beyond doubt. And I hear crickets. I mean, I really just astonished. So we hear the things that are that aren't, the things that ought not be are. We're finding the world to be pretty insane. And we find out evidences of that we have to maintain control despite the authorita, despite the color of an authority. You still have your own decisions to make. As I try to warn everybody about these bar associations, if I haven't done it for you yet to show you that the bar association is not your friend and not your representative and doesn't really support the law, at least in America, for the property and protections and all this, and really just advances the system it is set up, the bar association is set up. In fact, in at least 26 states I know of, have actually thrown out, substituted, supplanted the permanent laws of the people with their own Model Business Corporation Act. That's held universal. I read the documentation here again just recently, that it's a pivotal position of how they move governance along within your state. It is your state. That the government is giving itself the license to steal your stuff, and there's no check on it. And I hear crickets. That we have to step up. That the state only goes to what it benefits to them. And we understand in America, as we can see, and I will just refer back to Corporation Nation, where Clint Richardson makes a documentary to expose, to actually explain what Walter Burien was talking about these CAFRs, these comprehensive annual financial reports that explain that your system is set up, the government is set up inside and supporting the corporations, which are being parasitically feeding off the authority of the state to parasitically feed off of you, and that's okay. That the bottom line is really what the government looks out to, and you see that reflected in the agency's actions. And don't forget, when I say the bottom line, there's that new triple bottom line which attaches sustainable development or sustainable debt, sustainable servitude of the people. They call you humans, you little monsters. So that doesn't negate our power. Now here's a story. As we find things that are so that aren't, and aren't so that are, and watching that bouncing ball, it's very important. Amish girl, and I thought we had covered this behind the woodshed. If I didn't, that's fine. There was another story here. Amish girl, I guess I should say. Amish girl who fled United States to escape forced chemotherapy is now cancer-free. This is you taking the action. And the only reason why I really want to touch this is because it's on a website that I'm not really necessarily sure of, but never know. Who knows? I mean, you got to take everything with a grain of salt anyway. That this also speaks to parents rights. And it also speaks to something I told you under rights of child, that when the state comes against you to come after your little ones, you have to run. You have to run. And I've talked about this on prior broadcasts a long time ago. In fact, that was, I told you, the only woman that saved her sons and daughters against the abduction, kidnapping by the state was the one that ran. They actually listened to me and ran and did what I said. And it essentially to go dark and not communicate with anybody for a long time. Everybody who thought they can go against the system, and this is with things I knew would work in a just system. I knew they were up against an injustice, criminality, that you run, folks. When you're up against the child services, you run. You move out of the state. If you have to, you move out of the county. You move out a few counties away as well. You take your sons and daughters out of school. And that was the example that was the only thing I could come up with at the time. And that was what happened. Same thing happens here, folks. But let's start out with where it was interesting to me. These pieces right here were more important than the fact that she didn't take chemo and was still surviving somehow. That's a whole other discussion you know about. This is again the bottom line. The system is set up the bottom line of the system, and that's to advance pharma. That's to advance to any of the other corporations that are putting so-called taxes into the system, which they're not, because they got write-offs and credits. In this case, this is also in areas of private property underneath patent law. So there's no government actually input. It's complete control and the bottom line of the economy, if you will, that's generated. But court finds, in this case, I guess I should read the beginning of it. Some might call it a miracle, but alternative and holistic medicine healers aren't really surprised to learn that a 12-year-old Amish girl is now cancer-free after her doctors testified in a court just 6 months ago that she would be dead by now, and her family were permitted to refuse her chemotherapy. The clinic actually advanced to take control of this child, and the court gave it to her, to this clinic, to do so. And that's when the mother and father went to another place. They went to Mexico and to Canada to get what they considered alternative. Now, I'm not saying that maybe chemo might work in certain instances, but this is why I'm saying, for me, this issue here of your status as being taken over by the state to do the wills of the state as becoming more important, and the abolition of your rights as mothers and fathers, and actually your sons and daughters are your property instead of the state's ward by these title statuses, was more important for me to tell you again and remind you this is what was on the hook. But what they did is they ran. And they did what they thought was right. In this case, it worked out for them. So this is the thing. They were told that the guardianship to their own daughter was taken away and given to an entity underneath standards of pharma and the doctors, which is all, as you heard in the Corbett report right before me on UCY, he was talking about that fraud against us. The Rockefeller imposition for a long time. But here, more importantly, the court finds parents have no rights. Well, I've talked to you about this. I'm just doing a headline here. I'm not even reading much of this situation. It just points that I want to talk to you about is really the point when I bring up this so-called news, the notice to us. I've told you the parent is a legal status. Legal in the context of the meaning it's a custodial agent of the ward of the state called a child. That's how you, mothers and fathers, are treated when you go in, and you never refute the presumption of that legal status. And it'd be kind of easy because you'd ask for the document that took you out of your mother or father status and put you into the legal status of a mere parent under a ward, really a custodian under state law. And this gets us back to that Model Business Corporation Act, because that corporation can't act on you until you ask for something. And it's done by the application. They also do it by presumptions, and that's why you have to refute the presumption. But parent is a status. It's not mothers and fathers. It's an agent of the state looking over its ward called the child. The court finds parents have no rights is exactly the truth. Most people would say, oh, parents have rights. Well, no, folks. They're legal entities subject to the state. They have no rights. They have obligations and duties. They are the person. That status is the person, not the people, not the actual mother and father that's imposed with this status. That status. And so once you start understanding what's going on here, you start to get a better idea of what's going on here. And if you're conflicted about that, using Solomon's identity, you have a conflict about that somewhere. Even if it's in an ignorance over the subject matter here, you may not want to tune in anymore. You may already realize it means you're going to have to do something and go somewhere, and so you're not going to do that. You'd rather just sit comfortable and just think you're doing enough. This is a serious thing. As I said, the only woman that has saved her son and daughters was the one that ran. That's a hard thing to do for most men, I guess, not for the woman protecting her babies. And this becomes part of your options that ends up working for these people. When Sarah was diagnosed with cancer in 2013, her parents, right here in the article, it's a misinterpretation and misinformation. Were they merely parents? Is there a document ordering these people to be mere guardians as the status of parent who might have been their mother and father or not? And if there isn't, who committed the fraud to claim that? That's the question that you have to advance. But I wouldn't do it as a mother with the babies in hand. I'd be gone. Maybe the father steps up. Maybe you do it long distance. But this is serious stuff. When you get into dealing with this monster, the beast, this government, these people hiding under the color of government, you better have some tricks under your belt, and you better be able to go to battle. Otherwise, they take you. And this is just a small issue about this. And they do it with statuses. And they do it with just outright criminality. Let's just put it on the table. That Andy, their parents, Andy and Anna Hirschberger, initially agreed to chemo treatments. And that was probably coerced as well. But however, they opted to end such treatments when Sarah's condition grew worse, fearing that the treatments themselves might eventually lead to her death. As is typical in today's post-constitutional America, officials in the Akron Children's Hospital responded with a legal attempt to strip Sarah's parents of their right to choose their own daughter's medical treatment. But see, Sarah's parents had no rights under the context of the state administration of the state's child, not their daughter. And so this is this is a melting of terms, a mixing of terms that are like melting. It's mixing water and oil and making a mess of the matter. That when I look at it, I say, okay, yeah, well, they were right. The parents have no rights. See, most of y'all will go, how do the parents have no rights? Because you don't understand this. It's absolutely true that parents have no rights. Their obligations and duties, that status is obligatory to the state because it's a state-imposed status. And nobody asserted the fact of the other point, the other side, the external private side, which was that these were actually mothers and fathers, flesh and blood. And the state has no hold on that. And I'm not going to drop over into the problem of the marriage, so-called legal marriage license. Let's not go there. That's another way to handle that. But notwithstanding for this story and just this status, you have to understand these statuses. And I say I'm kind of going slow here. I realize I'm going a lot slower than I was going to. But this is important because these status terms are everywhere in every subject matter that if you haven't figured it out, you will get taken down by it. At least most importantly, you don't make the record that shows the people that are doing this are literally committing felonies against you, or these people in their case. Doctors testified that she wouldn't be alive after 6 months. Initially, the probate judge. Now, probate's a very interesting jurisdiction. You need to go look at all that as well. He's since retired. Judge John Lone ruled that Sarah's parents were competent enough to make medical decisions on their daughter's behalf. Eventually, however, the higher court ordered him to appoint a guardian. See, this is rights of child kicking in. No parent has rights against the needs of the state, and the needs of the state are to advance its legal entities. Remember, every expenditure goes to the GDP. This political system is an economic system. The bean counters have been with us forever, if people have not really realized that. So once this decision was made, the legal entity took over control. And the article goes through the low survival rates for chemotherapy. And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how low, because the court determined that the obligation and duty to care for the child was then displaced out of the mother and the father because they never asserted that, and then attacked the system for fraudulently determining to their detriment that status. I would strongly actually consider, I wouldn't, not just consider, I would claim that my daughter or my son was my property. And when they did that, they ran to go to Mexico and Canada, and because they did that, there was no court that could actually get them, and they didn't get found out. They can't be brought back, and so it's the time that the doctor said she wouldn't live had passed, and the guardian that was assigned dropped the case, dropped their claim for guardianship. Because obviously she lived longer than the experts said. And what the people were doing was actually working to extend that beyond what the experts said, that proved their position essentially moot, if not fraudulent on its face as well. Again, do you go back in and attack them? Well, I would consider it. But again, the point is run. You're up against this beast that we thought was a beneficial agent for people. Again, their transparency on how this happened to us should really alarm you. And what I try to get you to focus on, and be careful of things transparent. And you better be able to start seeing that transparency or the evidence of it very quickly, otherwise it'll come up behind you and get you. And I'm not fear-mongering, because this story tells you that it's fact. It also explains what I told you has to happen. You have to run from the system. I don't know that I would have, as soon as the state got on this, I would have probably submitted paper to show they didn't have a jurisdiction over any of it, and I would have taken off. I would have taken my daughter, just gone. No forwarding address. And so, sometimes you can do that, and sometimes you can't. This is one of those evidences that you can, and this is how fast the state can take your power. When you don't stand up against the felony and fraud of the mischaracterization of your actual status, if I can put your life into a status state. So what wasn't was, what is isn't, and you see that. The experts were wrong. They went and did their own thing, and I'm glad to hear that it worked out for them. They also point out to you that your consent to stand there and take it is as valuable to them as anything else. And these people didn't. They upped and ran. As cowardly as that sounds, folks, sometimes there's some fights you can't win. That's why when I came to that realization after being gung-ho in the first 6 or 8 months of this 30-year journey I've been on. About 6 months in, I realized, wow, this thing's pretty screwed up. This is why people don't fight. I have no place to judge other people that won't fight. But that was a different type of thing. You might come on and say, well, you have no judgment to make on people that don't fight now. That's not the type of fight I'm talking about. At some point, there's a battle going on that you may have to take your losses, but you still battle. Now we're coming to the point that you have to know how to act even before they get there. You have to hear them coming, because they're not transparent to you. And if you don't listen enough behind the woodshed, if you have the conflict of interest to think you know better, or think you know the truth and reality better than what I'm saying, or you anticipate that to know this means you will have to act and then you'll be down on yourself about that, stop that. Stop putting that on you. Just engage this enemy against all of us. So what wasn't was, and what was wasn't. Alternative medicine in this case helped. You know that's not going to go away. You know she's doing something, or she has something in her system that allows that organism to come up and come after her. So as long as that's being kept under control, she'll be fine. But see, this frailty in our system is what the government works on, and they've created systems to make money on that. That's another thing that you have to watch out for. So we've been told that we can't fight certain things, and we shouldn't. And that was an example of how you fight that problem. You run. And we move on to a new story. What about the banks? Now, I thought this was done and over, but I guess it's not. I guess they had more. Iceland bankers are not too big to jail. face 74 years in prison as the U.S. bankers bask in bailouts. Again, look at the conundrum there, and look at the problem and why we, as an answer, that title tells us why we may have a problem. And I've talked about Iceland a long time ago. They will give us the answer on how we at least do the banking thing, and that all these people weren't too big to fail. But the fact that the United States was not going to do that shows you the type of future that's going to be in your life. And as long as we hear crickets on that, as long as you continue to engage that system, allow it to bring benefits to you, it continues and flourishes. And the underlying problem of that is what's causing this to be is this IMF World Bank problem that you're now seeing having a say. As you saw last week, I discussed this. They have the say to say how all this thing is going to roll down because they're the ones footing the bill, essentially. Actually, you are, but they have got that covered up. But they claim the ability to direct funds. And the world in the future is going to be what you see here, not Iceland. However, if you look at Iceland, they in fact could deal with it. They in fact dealt with it. What this is in Iceland was really just whether or not you agreed with the amount, there was at least a measure of accountability. And that's, for me, in this story, is all we're talking about. This country, United States of America, and it's probably in every other country that's allowing Zio West to go destroy other people and themselves, their own people, Battlefield America, was that there's no one understanding what the accountability could be and nobody asserting it. And I say nobody, not nobody, but, the majority. That I suspect, and I've had this clarity on this, it's simply the lack of accountability. Had the too big to jail not be the reality in this country, in the United States of America, those people would be facing criminal time, whether you thought it was enough or not. They'd still be facing some accountability for this thing they did. If we go to other subject matters, if you were able to understand that what the state does is a felony against your family, to put on these statuses, and you charge color of law, felony theft by extortion, and conversion against the very officers you thought was an authority, the judge, the elected official, the prosecutor, the CSD, if you asserted that against them, and you insisted on accountability, instead of just taking it, maybe things to change, except to the standpoint that the prosecutor that's coming after you is the same one you're making a counterclaim to, that's trying to take your rights. Why? Because they're enforcing UN policy. I read that in the House Resolutions document, right? They're going to put forward the UN. This is what the Bar Association does. Rights of child comes before everybody. And that's what you out. So now you see the problem. Why I say run. Unless you see what we did on our lawsuit, how we attacked the very people that claim to be your benefactor, the Bar Association. You bring them into the suit, and you do it in a certain way, properly, so they can't get away from it. And now you start bringing a record, folks, if you have nothing else. And where its child is concerned, you run. Other things are not so simple. But with our lawsuit, none of us had to run. We just asserted the fact and got ignored, which was really part of the plan. I figured if they're not going to answer, I was astonished that they didn't answer. Just to tell you, I've said that before. I'll say it again. But I worked the case to the point that if they did, we couldn't lose, right? It's a default. And I was shocked that they didn't, because I thought it was in the books. Every time you sue a state, an officer, they have to answer. Well, I just proved that's not the fact in our case. That was back in 2013. This is not just yesterday. This is now a couple years going on, folks. That there's a way to address this and make the record of the felonies that are against us. And that's why I talked about these stories. It's really not, I could care less. Good for the people in Iceland. I'm glad the criminals got accountability. I'm glad their people didn't tolerate it, and whatever the accountability was they felt was right, got it done. We need to have that everywhere. We need, more importantly, to know how to get that done. And so this was a story of if this country really wanted to straighten its banking thing out, and it wasn't part and parcel to the future, the New World Order, it's all the leaders that you put in, no matter what party you throw out. Remember, we sued both parties as well as being accessories of this. They're actually the actors and help them implementation of this whole thing. You have to call them all on the carpet, at least in the record. And then you can show that your lack of remedy was them controlling the condition, and it condemns them again. And you do that, and you have a bunch of people looking on, and you hope they're don't have a conflict of interest to say, oh, I don't want to get involved. And that's as simple as this thing really is. We got to get involved in the right way. Like I was given an email of a video of a property, a farm back in Virginia. I looked at that. I was glad to see that the outcome was what it was. The farmers back there, I guess, have some kind of a Bill of Rights. But it was done in ignorance of the underlying disposal right use in the land itself that would cause everybody who came against any farmer to be a felon, if it's under any color of authority. That was not addressed and was not supported. That it took years for farmers to get the right to go do their thing. Was the wrong way to do it, though it became something that was allowing them to do what the law would have allowed them in the beginning. And I will say that it was done now, as I was explaining, when they did that, they took their production rights and converted them through legislation into commercial rights, which can always be conditioned now. That actually wasn't a lawful law to give farmers rights that they already had and change the status. The one status I noticed was they turned it into the euphemism of agro-tourism to allow what they called commerce, selling the goods from a farm. Folks, that comes appurtenant. Farm-to-market rights comes appurtenant to the farm. Farm-to-market means to transport, and we don't use the word transport because that's transportation, because that's commerce. You actually can move your product of your farm, the production from your farm, to the market by the roads for free and sell it. That's appurtenant. That's a productive right, not a commerce right. That we see the legislation right now going through to give people rights in property is a crime. That I didn't like seeing that, but I'm always glad to see people working out how they're going to at least do what the most basic thing is, because that's what's under attack as well. Same thing here. Same thing about the money. You continue to say the wrong argument. You continue to allow these people to go into office, to continue to the status quo of the slipping into the stinking abyss. Nothing's going to change. And yet it's changeable. All on what? Accountability. I'm asking everybody right now, and I've been for a few years, go find your theft by extortion under color of authority statute, and go find your conversion under color of authority, felony conversion under color of authority statute. They sound very similar to Title 18 USC Section 241 and 242, actually. You look for those similarities in your state statutes and start hitting these officials where you have a title or you have a right to something and they come and mischaracterize you. You go hit them with that as a defense against it. It's actually an offense. Certainly offensive to them, I'll tell you. And you get yourself on the record to say what you did was a crime. Now you have the burden to show it wasn't. And they'll throw a bunch of nonsense up, but you just destroy it underneath an additional color of authority that doesn't have a right. This is why title was so important, folks. This is why proof, your receipt for something, is so important. It's the visual evidence, the objective evidence. Patent law, patents are the ultimate title against all and everybody. And we don't tend to think of that as being important. We don't think that the titles, the rights, enjoyments, the use, the appurtenance is what they've now diminished to this thing called the bundle of rights, and there's only sticks in this thing. What they've done there in that violation is put upon you in every aspect. Your monetary system, your economics, your food, everywhere. Your housing, everywhere. And we buy into that. So accountability seems to be what was said not to be able to be done in the United States was done in Iceland, and it says later on that their so-called economy is doing way better than Europe, generally. Way better. And there's no debt. They paid off their debt to the IMF. They're not have that linkage and chain on their neck. So we see evidence of how it's supposed to do, and I'm asking those of you that listen to me that may know of people that have a better power than maybe you or I to start engaging and stopping this and invoking the authority that people have to make accountability and get us to go down the right path. We now have the evidence. This is not conjecture. Accountability is not just possible, it's required, and when you do so and you take responsibility for even the crime against you, it turns around. And that's why it's going to be, I said this is a sad, sad thing to find out that people don't listen to what I have to say because they have an internal conflict of interest about the truth. Another friend of mine saying it's going to be very brutal. I have to agree with that as well. But that's brutality is what's upon the world. So that's just going to be the common, the natural outflow of your cricketdom, your cricketness, your inaction. It's going to get brutal. It's going to get what they call austere. And that's a nice soft word when it's actually going to be getting brutal. Like I said, it's going to take a little while to get there, but the speed, the bum's rush is on. It's coming down. So what is and what isn't and what isn't and what is, we have evidence this week in little things I found to show that you have to take responsibility, you have to call it out, you have to make the accountability. And for us, in the Amish girl, the mother and the father and their daughter, the Amish girl, that was strict liability. You see the difference. Whatever their decisions are, someone's going to pay directly. That's not so for a legal entity that has it's amoral at best. No life. It's on paper. There's totally different jurisdictions going on here. Totally different cause and effects. You have to keep them separate. It's the thing that those that are in the seats of decision right now want to obscure. And a lot of it's done by term. Boy, I tell you, these words are very important. And your response is very, very critical. Some things that are that aren't, and are that aren't, and are not that are. We finally get a report whether they're going to go anywhere. Israel must draw all settlers, or withdraw all settlers, or face ICC. Ooh, is what I said. But okay, so now we have a record that Israel is in violation of the Geneva Convention and should face International Criminal Court. What a joke! But here's the record that that's no good anymore. And I understand this is all politically done and all this and that. It doesn't matter. The point is, there's been no accountability, and innocent people die. This is ultimately the end game. They want to kill you off, and they want to control you all. They want to make that melting pot that we didn't understand. They promoted the melting pot we know as America as a good thing. What we didn't know at the time, and we figured out, that's not a good thing. That's multiculturalism melted into one mass. An indistinguishable mass that's controlled. That has no individual identity. Now, I don't know if you'd like to eat a bowl of rice. See, multiculturalism is like a bowl of rice. Period. No salt, no pepper, nothing. No butter, nothing. Rice. That's it. It can be black rice. I don't care. It could be blue rice. It doesn't matter what color. It's rice. That's it. It's one thing. When they get all done, it'll be one thing. There will not be any diverseness in the world for people. Multiculturalism destroys differences. And if you notice, that's easier then for the people that are at the switches and the control levers to control. There's just one thing to control. What they've done is they've got everybody believe they're in that bowl of rice, the thing that they're eating. That's all that they're going to eat. And I use that because that's it. That's all you're going to get in the future is what you're told to eat. What's good for you? Soylent Green, as a matter of fact. And so they have to start making some authority in the UN. The International Criminal Court is dubious. big time. But it's underneath the UN system. And so they're giving more power, another facet, another dimension. They come against Israel on Palestine. That should have happened a long time ago. And not through these authorities either. Accountability should have been imposed a long time ago. That it wasn't should have been our clue. Israel must withdraw all settlers from the West Bank or potentially face a case at the International Criminal Court for serious violations of international law, says a report by the United Nations agency that was immediately dismissed in Jerusalem as counterproductive and unfortunate. Okay, a lot of paper waving here. The point is now it's noticed that no one else noticed it before. There's some problems down there. Maybe we'll get to it in a couple decades. Underneath the UN system, which is what? Israel is going to be on top financially, right? Ultimately. So it doesn't really matter here. But it's nice to know. Israel's not lily-white either. None of them are. And there's some other people inside this system are picking at the things they want to make highlight of, to keep your focus on, while they work behind the scenes to bring this new world order they keep telling us into fruition. What's interesting is I'm not so sure that Israel is part of the Geneva Convention. And I don't see how it could be legitimately if it's not actually a state and it's recognized as just an occupier in the lands while that land is disputed. So this is all just a bunch of noise at some level, but we finally get a record nonetheless that there's a genocide going on. There's oppressed people. Settlers, folks, are not supposed to be unsettled unless you should also identify the trespass to them. And in this case, a color of authority is a felony. So right in that statement, you see the unauthorized dissettlement of people is a felony. It's a crime against people. I don't need the Geneva Convention. And yet we get into these things and we agree that they exist, like human rights, like rights of child, like the UN itself. We agree these institutions and establishments exist by entertaining them. Just by accepting that Jews are in Israel as a people, a nation, is accepting, just talking about it. Talking that Israel is part of the Geneva Convention agrees and settles the idea that they are under a question as an occupier. Again, we're back to terms, their use, and what they do in action in the world. They call you a parent. That's what you are, but you don't have any rights. And it's not because of the way most people think of it. It's only because that parent, again, these names are conditioned by whomever is making a decision over them. And you can agree by not resisting that authority or those statuses placed on you. You can agree to the existence of something by calling it out. I'm not clear that Israel is anything. I'm not clear that Palestine is anything in some regard. I'm not clear that the whole thing is really not a big facade in creation, which we can prove that it is. UK, Balfour Agreement, all that nonsense that went on. To promote what is happening today, which isn't even what it is when you look at it. All these things are just characters on the stage for an underlying force and effect. It's going on as well right in front of us. They get us arguing about certain peoples and certain validities and certain chosenness. It's all nonsense, ultimately. We always say it's nonsense, but we don't realize, it's nonsense to even discuss it because there's something else going on. And I've been telling you for years, don't get lost in looking at certain people, certain things. Don't get into debates where there doesn't need to be any, because you waste your time. Because while you're in a debate, The one who has the plan to get you in the debate is acting on their plan that's transparent to you. Otherwise, you might have turned around and looked at it and stopped your fighting with your neighbor over some really irrelevant point. So, what Israel says is not happening is happening. What the world says isn't happening is happening. All this confusion goes on and no one calls it out and says, okay, then let's make it really accountable. More evidence. We can just use it. We don't have to go into opinions and arguments. I've told you before, I don't get in arguments. Not on these subject matters. It's pretty cut and dry to me. I don't have a discussion about human rights. I don't promote human rights. I know what the trick is. I call it out for the felony against people that it is. I don't agree in a discussion about it, except for to call it out as a felony. Any other subject matter, the same way. Why can I do that? It's not because of my opinion. I can go to the documents. You can too. It's not my trick. And so again, behind the woodshed, I bring these notices to us of how to prove this deception that's before us, and to bring what I hope would be your responsibility, you stepping up responsibly to bring accountability where you can and when you can. Another piece of the puzzle. Another piece of evidence for anybody so inclined, and some of these things will interrelate, some of them won't. The new FBI report debunks mythical war on police. Another meme that comes up when Black Lives Matter happened, all of a sudden Blue Lives Matter. Bunch of noise, folks. Just more things, more characters on the stage to get your attention. More activity to waste your time. While everyone's doing all that, they're not doing what they're supposed to do. And I'm not going to be the judge on what that is. I just know it wasn't what they should have been doing. And I think you can tell that just by what I've been covering the last few weeks. Throughout the United States, Americans believe there is a war on police. A recent survey of 58% of Americans agree with this sentiment. A new, privately funded billboard campaign hijacks the Black Lives Matter moniker to read Blue Lives Matter, highlighting powerful pushback from law enforcement sympathizers against activists. The FBI's 2014 report, Law Enforcement Officers Killed and Assaulted, released this week, appears to support the notion that police officers are in danger and unduly targeted. The numbers of officers killed by individuals committing felonious acts jumped from 27 in 2013 to 51 last year. But as you read this story, it goes on and on. It explains these numbers. And it explains how, in relation to other numbers and other years, things have actually come down in this cops being killed. And they are killing themselves to a large extent as well in the report. That if you look at, again, these are statistics that are used against you. And I say this, there's evidence that shows there is no war on police, that they're actually doing fairly well, thank you very much. They're killing you at a higher rate. No one seems to mention that. But there is no war on police, that you need to continue wasting your time on this issue. Here's the proof. Why do I talk about these in the statistical form? Because that's what climate change is. Anthropomorphic global warming is the relationship of a statistic. Bean counters, folks. And the statistics can be made to lie if you don't understand the underlying fact. And they can persuade you away from what you were supposed to be actually doing. So what is being said to be a war that apparently not so many more Americans, 58%, that would win a vote, but this is not what that's about, believe that there's a war against the police. The fact is there isn't. And so once you can prove that, you can move on to something that's more important, like maybe the cops killing you. When you are in your town and you hear that money is going to be stolen from you in taxes or fees to pay for cops because they need more security, you bring this in and you explain that to them and get it on the record. And you get a team around you that starts publicizing the fact of all this, because you don't need your money stolen from you to pay for more beatdown, because the ratio actually is, for the few cops that got killed in that year, they're killing a lot more of you. And why isn't the government protecting you from that? what you thought was, it isn't, and what was, wasn't. Until we get it challenged, folks, and this is where you have to step up, more things come out, and we find out aren't the way we're told just because authority says so. Bombshell ruling, feds have to keep their dirty hands off legal medical pot shops. Out of San Francisco, in a landmark decision this week, a federal court found that the federal government has no standing. Listen to the words as we've talked behind the woodshed here. Legal terms, very important. The federal government, the all-power, beat down everybody else in the world federal government, having standing enough to destroy countries, has no standing to block the legal operation of a medical cannabis dispensaries, provided they comply with state laws. Now you see in that one sentence the power of your state law, why it's now becoming more important that you do have good state laws if you can get them, if you can filter them through the oppressors and usurpers that are in the government right now. That this shows that your state laws drive what's going on in the nation against the federal government. State law says that for medical purposes, cannabis can be dispensed, trumps any federal authority to the contrary. It's really, that's another oxymoron in a way, isn't it? That the federal law says that there's no use for cannabis, and yet the states say that there is for medical purposes. Interesting. And so we have like a double shield here. The decision was a direct result of congressional act last December in which Congress cut off federal funding for the prosecution of cannabis clubs, provided they were operating within current state law. And so we see the connection to the funding, don't we? This now should advance you to the fact where your states are taking federal funding, they become subject to federal rule. They're not states anymore. They're federal territories, essentially, under that view, subject to the agreement of the acceptance of the grant monies. So we see here the distinction between what your rights are that the state then rules where Congress gave it up. The cutting off of the funds is very important here. This is what they did to the miners and their patents. And this is what I wanted to point out, probably more importantly than this so-called landmark decision, that Congress funding these things in the world is the only thing that gives them validity. You cut the funding and you stop the nonsense. No different than they cut the funding for the BLM to accept patent applications from miners, and now because there's no money, the agency, the executive branch, can't act without being funded, and they can't even take your application over the counter. They have no money. They aren't being paid to receive it, even though you're applying and supplying a fee. There's no funded system to reach across the counter to grab it from you, at least legally. That shows you how tenuous all of these things you see coming out of Washington are, and how the Congress, the House actually, is responsible for all the harm you're seeing that they continue to fund. The landmark decision came in the case of Lynette Shaw, who ironically opened the first licensed medical marijuana dispensary in the United States. Her dispensary was ultimately raided and shut down by the DEA in 2011. Shaw has been in court over 100 times fighting the legality of the closure since her dispensary was shuttered. The decision of the United States Judge Charles Breyer ended a long-running battle she had been engaged in with the federal government. Breyer ruled that the congressional decision to cut off funding for the prosecution of medical cannabis clubs took precedence over the Department of Justice, thus meaning that the federal injunction in place against Shaw and her dispensary had no legal standing. So 100 times she's in the courts before to get this. That should have been a number one decision by the court, where the court now finds the federal government has no standing. The federal government had no standing to actually have the court entertain the complaint. Shows you an injustice inside this. But again, notice to us how it's supposed to work. Notice how simple it is. The Congress can shut this down, and that should not be okay with you, that they allow this and they claim they can't stop any of this. Again, the executive executes the law. If the law doesn't pay for it, it doesn't get executed. If the law is not there, it can't be executed. They can't make it up. Now, they've been making up quite a bit. That's the part that's the other problem. 100 times she had to go to court. Nasty expense here on the private party here against the government to finally prevail. A decade in play or more. This shows you your system is not one of being free. This shows you that you're in a freedom, an enfranchisement, a benefit to enjoy these exactions, just as civil rights says. How long ago have I referred to that? Long time now. 42 U.S.C. 1981. The right to pay exactions of any kind. What did I just tell you? That coming under the color of law to extort from somebody is a felony, didn't I? Under state law. How come no one just sees this and puts it together and creates an accountability or outs those that will not make accountability? And how do you do that? Well, there's another statute, 18 U.S.C. sub 3. 18 U.S.C. 3 says that if someone comes to you with a felony or a crime and you don't put it before the proper course of law, you're an accessory to that. And you say, okay, well, so what? Well, the point is you're making a record. Apparently it worked for this woman 100 times, folks, and you can imagine this. That's not justice, especially when it's found that there's no standing. In other words, there's no right for a party to bring the complaint in the first instance. In other words, even though there's a complaint filed, it doesn't exist before the law. That's what no standing does. 100 times being brought in and no standing? Are you kidding me? That's justice? I don't think so. I don't even know how they argued all this because of what happened, so I don't know what they did if they did say that, and it was just the courts, doing the political thing, not the law thing. But the point is, the woman fought, and she is vindicated, and she vindicates the rights of the states, and she shows the hierarchy. If Congress funds it, they control it. If Congress doesn't fund it, there's no standing to argue. And more importantly, the state makes the law that allows it, trumps the DOJ's insistence otherwise. And so we are giving a lesson here on how this works and where we might jump in to alter things. Whether it's over a mass of people telling the Congress to stop funding this, and because that's a simple, quick letter, and then keep persisting and voting. For those of you that vote and want to vote those people, vote in those, get it on the record of what they're going to do. They're not beholden to you, but at least you get their commitment to not fund these things. You make an outcry, and then locally you work to get bills put forward in order to make things lawful. This is how stupid it's gone, to the point that Virginia, you have to make a law that says a farmer can grow food and sell it. How sad is our society that we have to do that because of the imposition of third parties without a right, and no one wants to hold them accountable as felons. That's as simple as the answer is here. A woman has to go for 100 times before the court to find out the party that's coming against them had no right to come against them in the first instance. We don't bring accountability, and the monster develops. We allow those who feign an authority to say that they're the ones that are making the accountability, and it's fraudulent, and we don't hold that, and the monster is created. This is why I keep telling you, you can't remain silent against a crime. It's really just a natural law. You put up someone's decision to have to pay a price against their acts, and they start having to balance whether or not they want to continue those acts. Now, certainly there's those that are, mentally touched, but that we're not talking about that narrow case. We're talking about the general case.
Most people are not criminals, I suppose. And therefore you're dealing with a smaller center of society, people of society that are doing these things and decide they can get away with it. And partly because the system is so corrupt that it allows this nonsense to happen. If there was accountability everywhere, then we'd be finding out how nice it was to live in peace and tranquility and prospering and being creative and doing what we wanted to do where we didn't hurt people. That would look more attractive than what we have now, which is dog eat dog, I need the next buck. Not a dollar, not a real value, but a buck, than the next guy. And because the system says if you can jump past this certain point, you're going to become the very few with a lot of those bucks against the masses that have none. And widening even more. That these monsters get created because we don't insist on accountability, and now it's come to the mass accountability demand. And so that's the problem now. I think we've kind of jumped the chasm now to now require the mass to work. I don't know that, although a few of us can work and we can cause stop certain things, the machine continues to run in other aspects that's so large in so many different dimensions that we can't do it only by ourselves, those of us that are. So we need more of us. We have this monster that's been put upon us that's driving it's going to be driving the new economy that they're building. In part, I tell you, it's to sustainable debt, but they're doing it by a mechanism with this climate science nonsense, which is not science. But when I talked about the monster, we actually have an article written by a climatologist, Dr. Tim Ball, who says the very same thing. The climate science turned monster. In other words, to me, when you didn't make accountability right off the bat, and that partly didn't happen because this system was so ingrained, it was already in place so that when this thing did become a monster, it wouldn't be held accountable. That he acknowledges this way, that the climate science, so-called, has become a monster. And I think it's simply because there was no real accountability. And this moves the conversation from last week, continues to move it along, where the Pope says that you have a moral obligation to this climate thing, your causation of warming, and a scientist himself, so-called, destroys the notion of what science is in its best day in order to come and attack the world on something that's not justifiable in any way. Tim Ball goes on to write, promoters of official climate, which is defined as the works of the UN IPCC, are desperate. 20 of them, including the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change members like Kevin Trenberth, asked the Obama administration to file Racketeering, Influence, and Corruption Organization Act charges against climate deniers. All but 2 of the 20 are at universities. All but 2 of the 20 are at universities, and the 2 are career bureaucrats associated with the National Center of Atmospheric Research. They all live off the public purse, but somehow in the weird world of climate science, that is untainted money. The RICO charge is ad hominem, not about the science. If virtually all the research funding from global warming comes from government and goes to those supporting the unproven hypothesis, there is no comparison between the amounts of government money going to the official side of the science and that going to skeptics. Their RICO charge is so ridiculous it hardly warrants a response, but it does require scientific perspective. I won't go on. The point is, these people that are the monster are, again, pointing out to say, oh, there's people that are racketeering and influenced. You need to go read that act. I think it's a part of its Title 18 U.S.C. Section 1963, maybe 1956, I don't remember now, but go read that act. See the validity of whether or not the elements can actually be made. But to show you that these people will go to no ends to fabricate what isn't, to allow the system to make what they perceive what is. No different than all the other examples I've talked about today. They have to cause people to respond in defense of their very lives. That these things that come up, somebody in the universities, and this is critically important if you listen behind the woodshed, why it's coming from the universities that say that people are racketeers for saying, essentially, the sun exists, that climate is something larger than a statistical relationship. We'll show you there's no end to the lunacy with these people, but they highlight something here in the universities. Remember, the Jefferson Mining District lawsuit sued through the governor those actors aiding and abetting climate change in the state, utilizing black hole funding called leveraged funding, which you hear in the CAFR. You know what you're looking for. You see that the CAFR is only supported by whatever it needs to be supported with. The rest of it's not documented, and it never ever has to be documented again, which is how they fund these things. And we sued against that. In fact, that act, it was SB 839 in the year 2013, was the leverage funding bill that we actually sued on to go after the mining moratorium and then expose the whole of the climate change, because it was all tied together about why they were shutting down more production. And we went after water bills and land bills and mining bills and all kinds of stuff. That we claimed that, in that article, that it was a proof that it was a religion, and in any regard, it was a destruction of the Republican form of representative government, which was duty-bound to protect producers and land owners. And all those people never answered, so we win by default. That's the rules. They would not answer that. That this monster is so large that it is in the system. That the collateral attack through the governor, which, remember, that guy's not in office no more. He got thrown out under, certainly they're investigating the criminality that him and his girlfriend were doing, his Kitzhaber dude. He's out of office now, right? 1 year after we perfected that default. He's gone. Exposing also the compacts between the British Columbia and all the states south and Washington a little north were all unconstitutional. That was the Missouri case. That the university system is pivotal in this thing. The university network system is the pivoting point of how this thing goes through the system. That we sued collaterally is why it became important in this story to tell you why there's university people that are advancing this nonsense. I wouldn't doubt that some of them are law schools and they make this stuff up. It's how the law schools are what through the university system, how they get all these bills. I've told you all this before. We identified all of this. It's the network of the plundering system that's gone on underneath the skin that no one understands. It's reflected right here in Tim Ball's reference of this monster that we're up against. That we have to stop. That's it. That's all we got. We got to stop this thing, folks. It's here, and it's tearing up all your towns. It's tearing up the countryside. It's destroying people. And I don't know how anybody can, after you see this, not stop, try to work to stop it. And it's so easily stopped, I guess, is the other thing. These people are committing crimes at the highest level, at all the oddball terms, and treason and sedition and all these kinds of things. They're literally destroying your nation right before your eyes, and no one sees it. Talk about transparent. That we have the proof of it, that people see it in the system. They're telling us. If you would just use that as evidence and go tell someone else, certainly in a seated decision. I'm working, without getting too far afield, I'm working with somebody that just came, tangentially working with some information, and I just get disappointed. What's coming to me now, I'm responding to help just by copying and pasting the statutes out of the code, the state code, to show there's no authority in the people that are doing the trespass and all the authority in the seated decision, the government, to stop it. That they're coming to me for that answer is a big disappointment, because those people are supposed to know. Now, I understand why they don't know, but that's still, you don't take on an obligation like taking an oath to fulfill an obligation to people and then not know what you're doing, I guess is my point. That if they're coming to me and I can copy and paste, and you can too, this is how easy this is, right out of the statutes, the words that they have as an answer to a foreign oppressor, In this case, a federal agency coming in to steal things from the people of the county under the color of law. To establish that copy and paste, folks, it's really disappointing to me, because there it was. It doesn't take it doesn't take anybody brilliant that has all this insight. It just takes somebody that paid attention after a while. And you can too. And it's not that hard. But we're dealing in a system that has been so fallen away from what we were supposed to be doing. It requires that we do that very simple thing. Copy and paste and hand it to someone and say, look, this is what you need on this subject matter. Focus on this. And it is the answer in statute. Not my opinion, not your opinion, not anybody's opinion. It's all been laid out if you know what to look for, and it's all right there, not that it's that hidden either. No, in fact, I went right down section by section in the code, copied and pasted the relevant parts of the sections that I had found, and laid it out in a way to show an authority exists in your county to stop oppressors from coming in and stealing your lands. In this case, it was the disposal of the highway. It's right in your statutes to stop them. And I'm astonished that not anybody else seems to know to do that. It's the same problem I saw in Virginia. The people don't rely on the already existing law to stop those that are trespassers. That causes one guy I admire in what he does. I think it's I don't know if his name is Saladin or Joe Saladin or Polyface Farms. He says there's no property rights. Well, no, what there is there's no people that are enforcing law, because law protects those rights. And then there's no outing of those that won't, in the seat of decision, that are duty-bound to use the law to protect the rights and the obligation and duty to protect production. Those are the ones that need to be outed as well. And so I was disappointed to hear him even say, well, there's just no property anymore. You're subject to someone else's opinion. Well, I say you're not. And I think I've found enough law in many states that says the same thing. That's why I say this. And if they didn't say it, I've also recognized that the grant disposals require it. If I knew nothing else, I knew that much, I could show the same thing. This is not an opinion. That we as a people don't know this is not allowing us the remedy to stop the creation of these monsters that will come out and blame you for not agreeing with their monsterness. It's fascinating. And we'll crickets, making good time. Making pleasant noises. Now, the monsters created, despite all the things I could come up with, someone else comes up with more about how lunatic this monster is. Again, to me, when you find out that the IPCC definition for anthropomorphic global warming is a relation or ratio of a statistic, you'll realize how stupid this whole thing is. That someone else comes out with a different way to approach this to expose how stupid this whole thing is. Not only is this thing blown up into a monster, it's kind of like the emperor wears no clothes. We're coming into Halloween, maybe a good metaphor. It's just a costume. Miranda Devine, interesting name for those of you keeping track of how this works. Perth, electrical engineer, discovers climate change that might change the debate. See, I don't agree that it's a debate, it's a crime. But the point is, this mathematician came up and re-looked at this whole thing. Remember, this is on statistics. So he came in and looked at it as a scientist, as a mathematician, essentially. Electrical engineer. As I told you, my experience as an engineer technician in an R&D lab, working very closely with many engineers, being able to converse with them about this. One of the engineers of which was able to show me how you can take a car system, intake to exhaust, and you can explain electrical a car's automotive transmission system and motor system and to the exhaust, from the carburetor to the exhaust, as an electrical circuit. And he was the one that exposed to me that we can just translate terms of equality across different subject matter areas of study. That it's conceivable to me that an electrical engineer can take math, which you have to do as an electrical engineer, and apply it to this condition and find what you need to do it. I'm going to give this guy a bit of credit to be able to do that. Perth-based electrical engineer David Evans may change everything about the climate debate, and on the eve of the climate change conference in Paris coming up in this next month. The former climate modeler for the government's Australian Greenhouse Office with 6 degrees in applied mathematics, Dr. Evans has unpacked the architecture of the basic climate model, which underpins all climate science. He has found that while the underlying physics of the model is correct, it has been applied incorrectly. He has fixed two errors, and the new corrected model finds the climate sensitivity to carbon dioxide is much lower than was thought. It turns out the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has overestimated future global warming by as much as 10 times. Enough said there. Here's the point. For me, it had been, these model, even if correct, the model had been applied incorrectly. What have I said about your law and your understanding and your knowledge? You have to apply it, first of all, and correctly, secondarily. That when he went back and reviewed and found a peer review, reviewed this as an apparently accomplished mathematician, he found 2 errors, and he fixed them. When he fixed them, some other things lined up to better correlate, at least expose that the estimate that they're going to pay cause trillions and trillions of dollars and controls beyond measure and sustainable debt in your world. This is the outflow of this. Was overestimated. And so when the peer review, I guess he's going to be called a heretic and be charged with RICO for being just a mathematician, isn't he? To me, this is more evidence. It at least causes the plausible question, doesn't it? It's not settled, is it? That you need to come forward and to talk to your local cities, the strong cities network, and say, listen, those extremists you're looking for, they're not so extreme. In fact, the rules that you're applying are extreme. We're going to challenge those in the first instance, right up front. And here's why. And you get this link. You go to the blogcast, you get this link, you read the story, figure it out yourself. Go find the report. Contact the guy. Get some evidence underneath your belt. Go to your congressman. Start pounding on this thing. This Paris Treaty, so-called, is no joke. You need to at least step up to that and persist and persist and persist. When someone brings something by climate change, you bring this article all by itself, maybe the report. I'd bring the report. Contact the guy and get his copy. Understand it sufficient to explain it to someone, say this guy's found a problem. You have no legitimate reason to enforce anything on us until you fix that. That's as simple as this starts to become. Even if we didn't go to the extent that it's a religion. As we prove through default tacit agreement by non-response, didn't refute the fact in court by the Bar Association, whose own House of Delegates wraps its arms around sustainable development or climate change. Not much different. One's a bigger issue than the tool called climate change. Agrees it's a crime against people. So we just need people taking these things. More information. What everyone thought wasn't because of the promotion. You show everybody that's been promoting contrary to these things as liars. It's called impeaching, if we can call what they're offering testimony. It's impeaching their testimony. Start treating this as a legal proceeding. As I've been telling you, make your records. Make them accurate. Make them truthful. Substantiate them with more than an idea. Find corroboration of those concepts. Find, in this case, I'm not a mathematician. I couldn't compete with analyzing and peer reviewing this guy's work. But I can understand how he might have got there to say, yeah, okay, it does show a question. That certainly unsettles the position taken that is causing trillions and trillions, and more importantly, because those are fabricated, more importantly, moral control of your life, taking away your free will, placing you under the direction of people that are at minimum amoral and more likely concentrated evil, folks, is all I can tell you these people are. Ice sheets may be more resilient than thought, says Stanford scientists. Now, I thought the word resilient in this is critical because that's what you're being used against you. You want to make cities more resilient. Well, I told you, but what they're saying is that they're going to make the internal infrastructure more resilient to your attack against the fraud that they are. That's what that resilience is. But in this case, they use the word resilient. Ice sheets are more resilient. You know, they've been talking about what happened to the polar bears, folks. We're supposed to, they're all been drowned by now by Al Gore apocryphal, remember? Sea level rise poses one of the biggest threats to human systems. Human systems now, not people. They care less about it. It's the human systems. Sea level rise, I look at this, the biggest threat to human systems is the UN systems that's threatened by the fact it's not doing that. But let's read the story here. Systems in the global warming world, potentially causing trillions of dollars worth of damages to flooded cities around the world. As surface temperatures rise, ice sheets are melting at record rates and sea levels are rising. But there may be some good news amid the worry. Sea levels may not rise as high as assumed. To predict sea level changes, scientists took the Earth's distance past when climate conditions were similar to today and investigate how the planet's ice sheets responded then to warmer temperatures brought on by increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In a recent published study, evidenced to you, those of you that will, in the Journal of Geology, PhD students Matthew Winnick and Jeremy Caves at Stanford School of Earth, Energy, and Environmental Science explored these very old conditions and found that sea level might not have risen as much as previously thought, and thus may not rise as fast as predicted now. Enough said there. Same thing, same story. When you look at the facts and reality, it's not happening with the way we're being told. A statistic relates to our activity as people on the earth. In fact, the world is a much bigger place than whatever man can influence. We will find out that truth at some point. That this lie, the denial of reality, the denial of the sun, is causing upon you all the hell you're watching come upon you now. And it's going to get worse. Again, some of us may not see that worse. I can just see it. If I have a sight at all, folks, I can see it coming to the little ones. When you apply reality, none of what we're being told is what they're going to present as truth in Paris to try to get commitments that is irrelevant too because they're already being implemented. The United States is already doing sustainable development, the very thing we enjoin the state of Oregon from doing. Now, we did that on paper. Again, that's like telling a bank robber to don't do the bank heist. We got some work to do. Then another report, someone's identifying what they think is why media coverage of climate debate has been corrupted. News journalism are being bribed by the United Nations and Oxfam charity to write scare stories about climate change ahead of global climate treaty negotiations in Paris later this year. And we hear that, we just watch where the money goes, folks. It's exactly what's going on. I can go through on and talk about that. I could read it all to you. I just want you to know that there's evidence and proof of this thing. You just need to track it down. If you're looking for something to do, I'm asking you, here's something. This is the one that's in our face right now. There's a lot of others, but this is the one that's in our face right now that's bringing on this. It'll be a brutal austerity. You're going to watch it as your life, your livelihood, your quality of your life gets diminished over time. For you listeners in the United States anyway, it's not going to look like you think it is. It's happened all around you, but you don't really recognize it. And the infrastructure, the strong city should have scared you a bit. It's already there. And then the U.S. DOJ tying into that on their website to the UN. It's done, folks. You have nothing but to respond against it if you have any idea of have any sense of self-determination. Things that we have heard that weren't that are, these things that we start finding out, we start researching on our own. We've been talking about this also. All this stuff just keeps coming up over and over. I mean, I'm having a little bit of difficulty right now thinking, there's nothing more really for me to tell y'all. There is, but it's that no one's acting is really kind of a difficult thing to watch. And I mean, no, you don't understand. The general population needs to be acting here. That it is so easily persuaded against its better judgment and action is really, like I told you, it's a fascination to me. Horrifying at one side and just fascinating at the other. And my sense is I wish I was the comedian to really pull that out and really get it to people. Because that's what I think it would actually take. I've thought about this the whole time, but I'm not that guy. I guess I'm too much in it. We are in a time when all the evidence is right in front of us. We don't have to talk about it more. And yet I have to talk about it more because there's not enough people moving forward. In the right way again. The right way. We heard it. The proper application was all critical. Even if you bought into the fact of climate change being even there and the model being accurate. I didn't necessarily agree with that, but he says it is. Okay, fine, let's go with it. He found 2 errors in how it's applied. Critical insight. And that's decided to be settled. Another lunacy. More. What isn't and what is, and we're told that we got the proof to look past it, folks, as I guess is the point, to get to where we need to stop wasting time on some of this. The worst nuclear disaster in U.S. history that you've never heard about. We're talking about contamination. We're talking about leaving a better world or not polluting the world we're in. And the government itself advancing climate change. Complete fraud. And not talking about the nuclear disaster it's created. All at the same time. As I explained to you with Fukushima. Fukushima, I said, listen, I told you, I'm on record. This is beyond. I don't even have to worry about it anymore. In fact, I don't even want to say it. If you listen to me, you know what I'm going to say. I'll say it just for maybe the new listener. Maybe there's one. The radiation was here. The reason why they stopped monitoring it was because the EPA started figuring out you're going to find out it's everywhere. They used Fukushima to cover that up. I proved it the one day I talked about I think it was Ottawa, remember, the Duke's reactor off-gassed. I caught it on infrared imagery on the satellites I saw it, and then the next day it comes right out of the nuclear reactor on the infrared satellite. It goes right over Ottawa. Next day they're claiming Fukushima did it. No, they're hiding. The government's hiding the nuclear radiation that sits on the land. The United States government deliberately hid the worst nuclear disaster in U.S. history, according to some experts in an in-depth investigation by NBC4 Southern California. Whistleblowers have also come forward to expose little-known catastrophe, which occurred north of Los Angeles in 1959 and leaked over 300 times the allowable amount of radiation into surrounding neighborhoods. That contamination may now be linked up to 60% increase in certain cancers in the area, but the government still refuses to acknowledge its colossal mistake. Enough said. It's been here, folks. And the fire that's in Nevada right now going off. It's been here, folks. The Fukushima went down and got in the tuna, and then they measured the radiation off the coast and found out it's coming from discharge tubes off the land, from a reactor. It's been here. Just a story came up to prove it. I didn't know this story was there. I'm just telling you this is what my study has done, not specific to these stories. You're being lied to. Here's the evidence. Go do the research, back it up, and then say, listen, you're looking at carbon being a poison. You're not too worried about this over here, are you? Right in our backyard. Yeah. You start to lay out the stupidity behind the focus. And then who are these people anyway? Who are these people to say anything? I have to agree with the polyface owner, the farmer in Virginia, the guy. These people come and tell you how to exist on your own land. I ask, who are they? I'm going to tell you, and I've said it before, they're a felon. And we don't demand accountability. And I'm not saying when you do that it's done. And I'm not going to say it's easy, because we're doing that right now with some ranchers. Some miners. we're going to have to go downtown and explain to the people that are in the seats of decision in the offices and the law enforcement how they have an obligation and duty to protect the people. If that doesn't explain how down the stinking abyss down we've slid, I don't know what else does. These people are supposed to know that. It's their obligation and duty to know that. They're derelict in the duty when they don't. And yet we're going to nonetheless go down and educate them on this. Does that mean it's going to mean a difference? Well, I don't know. I kind of doubt it. Except the pressure that we can put on their liability, which is how we got the meeting in the first place. So I know we've got a little lever. So knowing this stuff and being able to present it and educate people doesn't necessarily mean action, but you're a whole lot more close to the objective, which is to just get the law to start working to keep the peace. That's really the whole point. Everybody that doesn't act to keep the peace is really doing what? Breaching the peace. They should just arrest themselves. They should just be honorable enough to walk down to the jail and turn themselves in. But no, they force you. And this is why you say there's another proof you can't be quiet. You can't sit tacitly accept the crime against you, because they'll criminalize you. Not only will they conduct crime against you, they'll make you the criminal. Because you didn't say, wait a minute, you don't have that right. Court refuses to block Obama climate rule. Forced to counter a climate rule that the administration agency put forward, and the court, in this case, said, no, we're not going to block the rule. But then I looked very carefully at why, because I'm interested why. The Federal Court of Appeals declined requests Wednesday to block the Obama administration's landmark climate rule for power plants. Wow, that's a serious thing. That's the carbon tax attack right there. That's the carbon market right there. Attacking your energy infrastructure. This is a serious discussion here. This is a serious ruling. And I've just told you all that it's irrelevant. It's a big fraud. And you think, well, how can then Obama get a rule? Okay, that advances a fraud. And that's the question. Well, it's not really a question once you understand that the Bar Association's involved to allow it. And so now I'm more interested in why didn't this thing get stopped? Because I know we did the Waters of the United States rule comment for the Jefferson Mining District, and we were able to identify all the failures in that one pretty straight up. And when it went to court, the attorneys were able to, and this is water now, not the carbon market, the attorneys were able to argue pretty much what we put in our comment over a bunch of different subject matter areas. And they were able to get that rule shut down. Why couldn't they do it to this one? Well, it's more core to the agenda, first of all. But in a short 2 paragraphs filed by just after 5 o'clock, the Court of Appeals of the District of Columbia ruled the West Virginia. This is the mining state, folks. This is the state that ought to have had this in the bag. Their Attorney General, more than a dozen other states, and a coal mining company do not qualify for judicial stay that would stop the Environmental Protection Agency from implementing the regulation until the litigation is complete. The 3-judge panel ordered the petitions be denied, quote, because petitioners have not satisfied the stringent standards that apply to petitions for extraordinary writs that seek to stay agency action. Folks, you want to tell me how a trained attorney, a lawyer for the state itself, would not know how to meet the so-called stringent, and they're stringent, I guess, but I mean there's only 4 of them, the stringent standards required of the remedy sought in order to ensure that they would not waste their time in bringing it before the court and allowing the rule to happen from a state that lives and dies by coal at this point, because their tourism's not going to actually do much of anything, is it? And it's the first major loss of the conservative states since President Obama, which is the wrong thing to say here. This is not about conservative or liberal. This is about production. This is about energy. That's everybody uses that, folks. And so they want to focus you on these parties when in fact they're the aiders and abettors of the agenda. But I wanted to go back and look at this because the petitioners had not satisfied the stringent standards. That's very interesting. How'd they not do that? Federal Court of Appeals dismissed a lawsuit on Tuesday challenging the Environmental Protection Agency's authority to set limits of carbon dioxide emissions. Is what the whole point was, setting the emission standards. The three-judge U.S. Court of Appeals, Washington, D.C. ruled that the petition for review brought by the Murray Energy Corporation, Peabody Energy Corporation, and Attorney General of 12 states, including Kentucky, was premature because the EPA has only proposed a rule on greenhouse gas emissions. You tell me that they didn't know it was premature? They don't know the rule for advancing the remedy required the extraordinary imposition and irreparable harm that they had to meet? How incompetent are these people, folks? And I can't believe they're incompetent at that many people, so this is them advancing this agenda. They want us to do something that they candidly acknowledge we have never done before. Review the legality of a proposed rule, says the U.S. District Circuit Judge. The opinion in the blogcaster is attached to the article that I'm reading from. You can read it for yourself. It's very short. It's, like I said, 2 paragraphs, one sheet on a PDF. But a proposed rule is just a proposal. In justiciable cases, the court has authority to review the legality of final agency rules. We do not have authority to review the proposed agency rule. In short, we deny the petitions for review and the petition for writ of prohibition because the complaint of agency action is not final. Why didn't these attorneys know this? I think they did. And so the prior discussion, the headline you read, the court refuses to block Obama climate rule, is incorrect, isn't it? Remember that? That's what the title said, because it's not a rule yet. A climate rule was not blocked, because it's not a rule yet. But the West Virginia and 12 states and attorneys for big corporations all jumped the gun. And I have a link. I found the article. You can go read their paperwork. I think it's important to read what they did, how they went and done it, and you get the fact of how they went and done it, how it was wrong, and what they should have done, and how they can do it better. When you have to read, you learn administrative procedures. See, I have a different view on this, and I don't know if it got done, but if that rule was made without proper coordination, they should have stopped it on that basis. That the proposed rule is not, they need to enjoin the process until the agency engages the states in coordination, not cooperation, coordination. See, so they also advanced a wrong position, which is what caught my attention on this. Now, I know maybe I deal with this a lot, and maybe a lot of you don't care. Maybe a lot of you wouldn't have seen this. But I'm telling you, this is how you analyze this condition, and why we're going down the tubes is because what you think is going on isn't really going on. It just looks like it is. I don't know the answer if they would have charged against the EPA the failure to coordinate, to enjoin the failure to coordinate as an action, ordering a mandamus, ordering the EPA to coordinate, while the rule was in a proposed state, would have been a better case. Would have been, I think, a much better case. But see, if they did that, then they would make precedent that all these agencies have to coordinate where the environmental issues have, and that's where the state's power steps in. So, actually a lot in this. For those of us that read about this, or those of you that want to know how they're doing it to us, it's like this. This is the mechanism, and I don't know that I would have ever seen it had we not engaged the state legislature on the same things where they went on through and they did their own legislation. That's legislation, not rules. Or where we go and do coordination and the agencies have to comply. One of the on the waters of the United States rule, the judge recognized that the process was apparently defective. Apparently meaning it was facially defective. The process alone. That would have defeated that rule all by itself. And so when you're looking for tools on how to do this, they're telling us where the key points are. For me, a lot of it's confirmation, because I've put a lot on doing what we're doing in the interim of finding enough people to actually push the law forward and start outing all these criminals in the office seats of decision. So this was an analysis on a remedy that the states didn't meet, the private parties didn't meet it, they jumped too fast, they didn't do it on the potentially the right point, what I would be suing on. What I'm asking all counties to sue on right now, where rules are being done without the aid of this thing called coordination. It's the ability of a government to make sure that the process that the agency is doing is consistent with law and the local needs, the local obligations and duties. Very serious meeting of the requirements of the law for your local control. I see evidence of it being destroyed and then promoted as if Obama won. All completely irrelevant when you read and understand and look very carefully. This wasn't even a long case, is I guess the point. I chose a case that was very, very important. It's right on what we're talking. It's part of the bum's rush. It's part of how they're going to push this through, and I wanted to expose to you in a very simple way, a very simple case, how the attorneys screwed it all up. And how the courts ran with it, and they gave you the right answer. They gave the right answer here. I'm not against the judges on this. But what they sued upon and what they then presented in execution of the remedy, fail. Complete fail. That we have to be acknowledging these things. And so here's the other point. We saw it in the documentation. The attorneys are going to do this to advance what? Sustainable development. It says it right in their resolutions, advancing the UN agenda that's now put upon us. That's now a moral obligation on you, this crime. Think about how screwed up this is and how much they're getting it forward. You are going to be considered, if they get their way, to be committing RICO, to not advance a felony against yourself and to promote otherwise. Think about that. That's how screwed up. And we've watched this whole thing. It's pretty fascinating. At that point, I get to start laughing a little bit. We really are stupid, aren't we? We really are that dumb. Now, I get frustrated when I see it because I think we're better than that. But get it. That's my opinions coming. My feelings coming in. Let's knock that out. It's a big joke. What we are. We are a joke. We can end it at any time. But if we don't, you're watching the felony come on us. And we'll have nothing to say about it. We won't have a complaint because we aided and abetted. We are the 18 U.S.C. accessory after the crime. 18 U.S.C. 3 that I told you the attorneys are right now, who don't advance the prosecution and accountability. So, more evidence, more proof, we can go ahead and do it. That's one way to go after it, not the loss. Analyzing your case, and that's the EPA at federal level going to federal court. I didn't even analyze whether or not there was jurisdiction in those courts to do that, notwithstanding all that. This is the same thing you'll do at local levels, at county court or your state court. You'll have the same analysis to do on the cause you want to make against the harm against you and the remedy, and the fulfillment of that remedy has to be correct. If you improperly apply that model, like the mathematician told us about climate change, you will fail. And this is where you ask the wrong question, and you get the right answer. Perfect example here. And then I'm just shaking my head. And all the attorneys were all wrong. Every attorney that jumped in on that was wrong. And then you want to go down to an attorney and have your property protected? Are you kidding me? And I hear crickets on that problem? Are you kidding me? I mean, this is a big stand-up comedy routine we're living through. I'm certain. As the EPA then, destroying everybody on one hand and almost looking like they're coming to our aid, except that you have to understand they're supporting a standard. EPA to start labeling Monsanto's Roundup as being carcinogenic. This is older news. Way back when. I'm not getting to the tabs down. I've been going through the tabs, following the most recent WHO, not the Rot Group, not the OWL, but the WHO WHO, World Health Organization, Cancer Research Division report, the EPA decided to label Monsanto's Roundup herbicide as cancer-related. So California has a real strict bits on that. That's where it is. The EPA Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment in California issued a notice of intent to label Monsanto's famous weed herbicide Roundup to have glyphosate, which can cause cancer. Now, interesting, EPA's Office of Environment in California. Did you miss that? This is a federal office in California, commanding commerce as a federal agency. Same thing in all the states. So when you think your state has state laws and state sovereignty, forget it. I mean, this is how it's all been destroyed. However, the WHO, UN authority, comes in and dictates to California what they're going to have to label through the EPA. Again, now this is the DOJ last week showing they're going to impose the UN. Now the EPA has shown to impose the UN. If you didn't think it was already here. I'm happy to see it. I mean, we should be all this stuff should be disclosed, right? I mean, this is what I guess is my feeling. This shouldn't even been an issue. You know, the company doesn't want to see this, but in fact, it's not glyphosate. Just doesn't bind up all the minerals in your system. It actually has an ability to cause cancer. Now, I don't know if that's indirect or direct. I suppose if you read about glyphosate and what it comes from, you'll find that those systems, some of those chemicals, glyphosate I can't find is natural, but some of those base chemistries that this is made from are natural to systems, and they have certain functions in the body which could look like to aid a cancer, such that it is. But so we have the EPA coming out apparently to give us help, but it's actually to enforce a United Nations standard. So we get the right action, but I think for the wrong reason. Again, you're going to get all the links. I don't want to read more. I got so much that I can talk about. I'm realizing there's so much to talk about. When I touch these bases, I'm not even touching some things that I thought was important when I originally put the tab up. I've forgotten all the important things to respond to you to. If you read this stuff, you see it. You see it just comes out and just slaps you in the face. All the important things that you need to see to take as notes that you can put together and talk to people about that just isn't so right. In other words, you find the error in what appears to be the right action so that they don't bring another, a wrong action like this international standard on your life. The do-gooders outside looking in and saying, hey, you can't do that. Don't ask you either. They just come in and put their alternative on you, and then they make a process that makes you brings about your consent. This is what we do in international inspectors. USAID goes into a place, doesn't understand the local customs or the nature or how man has grown up living there, and wants to bring agriculture. So missionaries go and plant plants along the river because that's where the water is. And the plants all grow up in time, months and months and months, and all the slaves are made to go and work their corn now for the outsiders, the foreigners want them to grow their own food. And about throughout the time of harvest, the migrating herd of elephants comes through and eats and tramps down all that work. And the people, the natives there laugh because they say, well, we knew that was going to happen. Why didn't you ask us? That's why we don't grow corn here. This is what's going on. Trespass. You think you're better than the guy that lives at the place, and you're going to tell somebody what to do. That's a felony. That's a crime against people. And the faster we get to pointing that out, the better, I think. Look at the deception inside the right action, and you're going to find more deception when it comes from these deceivers. You have to be able to watch that bouncing ball. You really have to keep track. It's really not that hard once you get the basis. You don't even start talking about it. I only talk about some of the stuff to tell you this is what you're looking for. Otherwise, I don't talk about a lot of things to the people I'm working with that we're doing something. All that is the foundation upon which we act from. We don't rehash the foundation. That's why it becomes easier. You definitely have to get that foundation, this ability in you. Even though it's a good thing, and I don't get involved about the fact, oh yeah, it's a good thing that glyphosate may have a disclosure on it now. Okay, that should have happened anyway. It's not about, I hate Monsanto. So we have to, again, it's trying to be neutral about this as well. Okay, I hate Monsanto. But that's irrelevant to my focus on whether or not Monsanto has the right to produce a product that may do this to us, that we find out may do it, and then not tell anybody about it. Now, once you're told that you want to use it, well, that's okay, to the extent that it doesn't drain off into my property, I guess, but that's okay. Which is a fascinating. I won't go any further on the. There's more to report. I got plenty of tabs, but I'm going to go off on this glyphosate thing. And I think it was put in the chat of the UCY about a tampon contamination of glyphosate because of the cotton. I didn't find that as disturbing as when you looked at the report of somebody, a scientist, writing against the report, who's trying to justify, it's only 0.005 micrograms per gram of glyphosate in a tampon. This is a scientist now arguing that it's okay. Why? Because the scientist, the other guy who did the research, measured that 0.005 micrograms per gram was generally what you find everywhere in all soils, even uncontaminated. And so her idea was, that's okay then. It's the same as everywhere else. And I looked at that and said, wait a minute, isn't that like looking at missing the trees for the forest? Glyphosate was invented. It's a manufactured thing that didn't come out until they made it to descale boilers. Monsanto picked it up. One of their scientists says, hey, wow, we can bind up all the minerals in a plant and it'll kill it. But we're going to make a herbicide out of it. It wasn't in the world until the first patent in the late 50s, I think it was. Wasn't applied heavily until about the 70s. That it wasn't anywhere before glyphosate was invented, and now it's 0.005 contamination, and that's okay? I need to find out about that first, don't I? I think. And then we find out it's cancer. Well, we don't even know then how much. And then the scientist, so-called, was actually arguing about the fact that, if I will, not to insult anybody, the vagina doesn't absorb anything because that's the way the blood comes through. It doesn't reabsorb the blood, so that's okay. Totally missing the point of a functioning mucous membrane. That maybe what's coming out is made not to go back in, and yet the mucous membrane still works for its flora, fauna, whatever it does to keep itself healthy. That it still absorbs nutrition. This is the science that we are now suffering as well. That you have to get a handle on to question up in the first instance. Don't accept it. But you have to not accept that. It takes an act, it takes intelligence, it takes coherent thought, and it keeps a critical mind, and it keeps a persistent action that all of you all need to start doing. Why? Because if you don't, these criminals are going to get away with the crime. Thank you very much for listening today. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you could put it to use, more importantly, and properly applied. Please make sure to support where you can and as you can. RealLibertyMedia.com, Grimner, and the website, RealLibertyMedia.com, and all the things that he has to offer there on the front page, but most importantly, our broadcasts here, and Freakers Ball, and whoever else gets online there, and then WorldTruth.org, social network that provides the servers that you hear my voice. They join up, be part of a discussion. Bring a donation for the servers or whatever you can do to support it, and UCY.TV, and allowing a time slot, and whomever else is out there. I see different links to my broadcast in different places, but I don't really have conversation with anybody, and the FM and AM broadcasters appreciate all that. Your support too. Anybody who can be a voice, please sign up. Just do a broadcast. I mean, there's more space. So thank you very much again. I'll talk to you later. Be good.
Well, that's another lesson. I hope with today's information you can take it to those that misbehave. From behind the woodshed, leaving his mark on the beast, this is Hal Anthony. Till next time, journey with purpose.
That's what opening up a can of whoop-ass feels like.
Son, you just opened a whole case of whoop-ass.